She married a year-old millionaire, but days later, regret led her to redemption. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We have noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is the best way you can help. It is quick, free, and it lets us keep bringing you heartfelt stories every week. Your support means everything. Let us keep this channel growing together. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. She thought 7 days could change her life forever. But she never imagined regret would become the only thing she could not escape. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain fell softly over Charleston that morning, a silver curtain draping across the streets, as Olivia Hart stood before the mirror in a white silk gown. Her reflection looked perfect, too perfect. Every fold of fabric, every pearl pinned into her dark hair spoke of wealth, of control, of a future already paid for. But her eyes told another story, quiet, trembling, unsure. Across the room, the wedding planner whispered final instructions, and the string quartet began to play. Olivia's fingers tightened around the bouquet. She whispered to herself, "It is just 1 week, Olivia. You can survive anything for 1 week." The chapel doors opened, and there he was, Richard Alden, 71, a man whose name carried weight across boardrooms and newspapers. His silver hair was neat, his posture regale, but his eyes were tired, like someone who had learned too late that power could not buy peace. When he took her hand, the crowd saw a deal dressed as a marriage. To them, she was a gold digger. To him, perhaps a last attempt at companionship before the inevitable end. But as they exchanged vows, Olivia felt her heart fracture. The ring slid onto her finger like a shackle. After the ceremony, guests clinked glasses. Music swelled, laughter echoed, but not from her. She sat beside Richard at the long marble table, smiling politely while he spoke with old friends about markets and legacies. Every word reminded her she did not belong in his world. That night, inside the vast Alden estate, silence wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Chandeliers glittered above. Portraits of forgotten ancestors stared down from the walls. She walked through the empty halls and whispered, "I traded freedom for safety. But what have I really bought?" Upstairs, Richard sat by the fireplace, a book open but unread. He looked up when she entered. "You should rest," he said gently. His voice was calm, courteous, almost fatherly. "I will," she replied, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. When she closed the bedroom door behind her, Olivia pressed her back against it and exhaled shakily. The silence of the mansion was louder than any storm. In the first 7 days, she would learn that luxury has a sound, the echo of loneliness bouncing through, rooms too large for love. And somewhere inside that silence, regret began to whisper her name. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floors of the Alden estate, pale and cold like the house itself. Olivia Hart woke to silence, the kind that made her chest tighten. The bed beside her was empty. Richard Alden had risen before dawn, as always, to read the newspaper in his study. She could hear the faint rustle of pages somewhere down the long hallway. She moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtains. The gardens below were flawless, trimmed into patterns that looked almost mathematical. Even the roses bloomed in perfect symmetry. It was beautiful, but it felt lifeless like everything in his world. At breakfast, the table stretched nearly 20 feet. 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware, and a silence that filled the space between them. Richard glanced up once and smiled politely. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," Olivia replied, forcing a calm tone. She reached for the coffee, but her hand trembled. Richard noticed. "You do not have to be nervous around me," he said softly. "This house can be intimidating, even for me." His words were gentle, but they landed heavy. She nodded without speaking. He looked down again, adjusting his cufflinks habit, or armor. That afternoon, Olivia explored the mansion on her own. She wandered through corridors lined with portraits of the Alden family faces that looked proud, distant, unwelcoming. In one of the rooms, she found an upright piano covered with a sheet. She lifted the fabric and touched the keys. The note that escaped was slightly off, dusty, like a memory forgotten. A small photograph sat on the piano, Richard, with a woman much younger than he was now, both of them smiling under the summer sun. The back of the photo read, Clara and Richard, mot ngin chin cham tam mui chin. Olivia stared at it for a long time. She whispered, "So, this is who you really loved." When Richard appeared at the doorway, she startled. He was carrying a cup of tea, his expression unreadable. "I see you found Clara," he said quietly. "I did not mean to intrude," she replied quickly. He shook his head. "No, it is all right. She passed 10 years ago. Sometimes I still forget that." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a brief second, Olivia saw something she had not seen before: pain, raw and unguarded. That night, she could not sleep. She sat by the window of her room, the Charleston rain falling again outside. Her reflection looked smaller against the storm. She whispered, "He loved someone else, and I am just a placeholder in his story." The next day, Richard invited her to join him for a walk through the garden. The air was crisp, the scent of wet soil and roses filling the air. "Do you like it here?" he asked. "I am not sure yet," Olivia answered honestly. "It is different from what I imagined." He nodded slowly. Different can be good, or lonely, sometimes both. As they walked, Olivia noticed how he favored his left leg slightly, the hint of an old injury. She wanted to ask, but he changed the subject, pointing to the greenhouse ahead. Inside, the air was warm and sweet. He showed her the orchids he had planted himself. "Clara loved these," he said, touching one carefully. "I keep them alive because it feels like she is still here somehow." Olivia's chest ached. "They are beautiful," she whispered. He turned toward her and smiled faintly. "So are you, Olivia. But beauty can be dangerous. It makes people think they know who you are before you ever speak." That night at dinner, she replayed those words in her mind. For the first time, she sensed that behind his calmness was not arrogance, but grief, and behind her own silence, a kind of guilt she could not name. Later, in her room, she opened her small notebook, the one she had brought from her old apartment, and wrote a single line across the first blank page. "Maybe redemption begins the moment we stop pretending we are fine." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The mansion shuddered faintly, and Olivia felt it in her bones. Something inside her was beginning to crack the first quiet tremor of regret that would soon change everything. Days turned into a quiet rhythm inside the Alden estate. The rain came and went, washing the windows clean, yet the air inside never seemed to change. Olivia Hart followed a routine that felt rehearsed: breakfast at 8, reading in the conservatory, dinner at 7. Richard Alden remained kind, respectful, but distant, as if some invisible wall stood between them. Every evening, he retired early to his study, leaving her to wander through the house alone. She often found herself standing in front of the same window in the east corridor, watching the world outside move while hers stood still. One afternoon, she walked past the open study door. Richard was sitting at his desk, his reading glasses low on his nose, papers scattered before him. His voice carried softly into the hall. "Clara, I did what you asked," he whispered. Olivia froze. He was not on the phone. There was no one else in the room. He was speaking to his late wife. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. She stepped back quietly, her throat tight. In that instant, she understood something painful. She had not just married a man grieving the past. She had married a man who was still living in it. That night, Olivia dreamed of the photograph again, the woman's smile, the sunlight, the warmth she could never replace. When she woke, her pillow was damp. She had been crying in her sleep. The next morning, the sky was pale and clear. Richard suggested a short drive to the waterfront. "The air will do us good," he said. She agreed, even though the thought of being trapped in silence beside him made her uneasy. As the car moved along the coastline, she watched the horizon blur. "Do you ever regret anything?" she asked softly. He was quiet for a moment. "Regret is a waste of time," he said finally. "You cannot rewrite the past." She looked out the window. "Maybe. But sometimes, you wish you could at least apologize to it." He turned toward her, studying her face as if hearing her for the first time. "You sound too young to speak that way." "I feel older than I should," she replied. They stopped by a small cafe overlooking the water. The air smelled of salt and coffee. For a brief moment, the world felt normal, almost human. A waiter smiled as he placed their drinks down. "Beautiful day for second chances," he said cheerfully. The words lingered. Olivia's chest tightened, but she smiled politely. When Richard looked at her, something in his eyes softened. Back at the estate, she found him later that evening, sitting in the darkened parlor. Only the glow of the fireplace lit his face. He was holding an old letter, edges worn and yellowed. Without looking up, he said quietly, "I wrote this to Clara years ago. I never sent it." She hesitated at the doorway. "May I ask why?" "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "And by the time I found the courage, she was gone." The silence that followed felt sacred. Olivia stepped closer, the firelight flickering across her gown. "Maybe courage is not about sending letters," she said softly. "Maybe it is about facing the people who are still here." Richard looked up. His eyes, tired yet gentle, met hers. "You are wiser than you think, Olivia." Later that night, she stood again by her window, watching the storm gather beyond the trees. For the first time, she saw his loneliness not as distance, but as pain. And in his pain, she recognized her own reflection. She whispered, "We are both ghosts in this house, haunted by different things." The thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. A gust of wind blew through the cracks, making the chandelier tremble. Olivia closed her notebook, pressing it to her chest. In the darkness, she made a silent promise not to run yet, not until she understood what her presence truly meant in this man's broken life. She did not know it then, but that promise would soon lead her to the very edge of heartbreak and redemption. The morning after the storm, the air around the Alden estate carried a strange stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Olivia Hart walked down the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing softly across the marble floor. The scent of coffee drifted faintly from the kitchen, but Richard was nowhere to be seen. The servant said he had gone for an early meeting in town. She wandered into the conservatory, where dew still clung to the glass. The orchid stood in perfect bloom, radiant and fragile. For a moment, she touched one of the petals, remembering his words. "I keep them alive because it feels like she is still here." Somehow, that thought pierced her. He had built an entire world around memory, not life. Olivia sat on the bench, pulling out her small notebook. The same line stared back at her. "Maybe redemption begins the moment we stop pretending we are fine." She sighed and wrote beneath it, "But what if pretending is all that keeps us breathing?" By noon, the sound of an approaching car broke the quiet. She looked through the window and saw Richard stepping out, his movements slower than usual. He held one hand against his chest. Concern replaced hesitation, and she rushed outside. "Richard, are you all right?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Just a dizzy spell. The doctor insists I rest more, but I am too stubborn for that." His voice trembled slightly. He tried to wave her worry away, but his face had gone pale. Without thinking, she reached for his arm. "Please, sit down, just for a minute." He hesitated, then allowed her to guide him inside. They sat on the edge of the couch, silence stretching between them except for the soft ticking of the clock. Olivia looked at him, really looked his shoulders no longer straight, his breath uneven, his eyes holding both strength and exhaustion. "Richard," she said gently, "when was the last time you went to the hospital for a full checkup?" He chuckled weakly. "Doctors have a way of finding problems where none exist. Or maybe you are afraid they will find one that does," she replied quietly. That made him pause. For the first time, he looked unsure. Then he nodded, as if conceding defeat. "You sound like Clara when you speak like that," he whispered. The name cut through her like a blade. Clara, again, always Clara. Yet instead of anger, she felt something else. Sorrow, deep and real. She reached for the teacup on the table, handing it to him with both hands. "Then maybe she left that voice in you for a reason," she said softly. He looked at her for a long time before accepting the cup. "You are a strange young woman, Olivia Hart," he murmured. "You came here for reasons of your own, and yet you seem more worried about me than yourself." She met his gaze. "Maybe both of us made choices out of fear. Yours was to live with ghosts. Mine was to marry one." The words hung in the air, too honest to take back. Yet instead of anger, Richard smiled small, fragile, but real. "Perhaps," he said quietly. That evening, Olivia found herself walking alone through the long corridor again. The storm clouds had cleared, and moonlight poured through the tall windows. She paused in front of the piano. The sheet still covered it, dust settling like snow. Slowly, she lifted the fabric and pressed a key. The note rang out soft and imperfect. From the far end of the hall, Richard's voice carried. "I did not know you played." She turned, startled. "Only a little. My mother taught me when I was young." He walked closer, steady but slow. "Then play, something for me. The house could use a little music." Her fingers trembled as they found the keys again. She began a simple tune, one she barely remembered. The melody wavered, then steadied. Richard stood beside her, listening. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel heavy. It felt alive. When the song ended, he said quietly, "You have brought something into this house I thought was gone." "What is that?" she asked. "Light," he said, "and maybe a little forgiveness." Olivia did not answer. But as she looked at the reflection of the two of them in the piano's polished surface, old and young, broken yet breathing, she realized something had shifted. The mansion no longer felt haunted. It felt human again. Outside, the night was still, and for the first time since her wedding, she did not feel trapped inside her choices. She only felt present, fragile, uncertain, but alive. The following days brought a strange warmth into the Alden estate. The piano that had once been covered in dust now carried quiet melodies each evening. Sometimes, Richard Alden would sit beside Olivia Hart while she played, listening in silence, his hand resting gently on his cane. The air between them no longer felt cold, it felt hesitant, like sunlight learning how to enter a room again. One morning, Olivia woke earlier than usual. The house was unusually still. She walked downstairs and noticed Richard's study door half open. Papers lay scattered on the floor, and the old man was slumped forward in his chair, his breathing shallow. "Richard," she cried, rushing to him. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "I am fine," he murmured, but his voice betrayed him. Without waiting, she called the emergency number. The sound of her trembling voice filled the mansion. The paramedics arrived quickly, carrying him out on a stretcher. She followed them into the ambulance, her hands clasped together, whispering prayers she had forgotten since childhood. Through the blur of sirens and flashing lights, she realized how much she cared not as a duty, but as something painfully human. At the hospital, the doctor spoke gently. "It was a mild heart attack. He will recover, but he needs rest and real company. He should not be alone anymore." Olivia nodded, tears stinging her eyes. When Richard awoke, he found her sitting beside the bed, holding his hand. "You should not have stayed here," he said weakly. "I was not going anywhere," she replied softly. "Not this time." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You deserve more than this old man's broken heart, Olivia." "Maybe," she said, "but you are the only one who never made me feel small." The next few days passed slowly. Olivia helped him walk, adjusted his blanket, made soup that never turned out quite right. The nurses watched in quiet surprise as she stayed long after visiting hours. At night, when Richard slept, she read the letters he kept in the drawer letters to Clara that he had never mailed. They were filled with regret. "I should have said I was sorry for choosing business over love. I should have told you the truth sooner. I should have listened." Each line felt like a confession whispered too late. Olivia folded the letters carefully and whispered, "Maybe saying them now still counts." One afternoon, as Richard sat by the hospital window watching the rain, he said quietly, "When Clara died, I thought I had nothing left to give. That is why I offered you marriage. I wanted to feel needed again, not loved. That was my mistake." Olivia's eyes filled. "You did not force me. I chose this. And maybe I needed you for the same reason you reminded me that love is not about age or perfection, but courage." Richard smiled faintly. "You have changed this house, Olivia. You have changed me." After a week, the doctors allowed him to return home. The day he arrived, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the foyer. Olivia helped him inside, but something in her heart had shifted. The house no longer frightened her. It felt almost like a place she belonged. That evening, she prepared tea in the same porcelain set that had once belonged to Clara. When she brought it to him, Richard looked at the delicate cups and smiled. "She would have liked you," he said. Olivia sat across from him. Maybe that is her way of forgiving you through kindness that found its way back. He nodded slowly, emotion thick in his voice. You talk about forgiveness as if it is easy. It is not, she said. But sometimes forgiveness does not start with others. It starts when we stop punishing ourselves. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time not as the girl he had married out of loneliness, but as a woman who had quietly walked into his life and rebuilt the part of him he thought was gone. That night, when Olivia returned to her room, she wrote one more line in her notebook. Regret brought us here, but maybe redemption is learning to stay when every part of you wants to run. Outside, the rain stopped. The moonlight spilled across the piano, across the orchids, across the old man sleeping peacefully downstairs. For the first time since her wedding day, Olivia felt something like peace. It was fragile and new, but it was real. Spring slowly unfolded over Charleston, and with it, the Alden estate began to breathe again. The garden that had once stood in perfect, lifeless symmetry now carried color and imperfection Olivia Hart's touch. She would spend her mornings trimming vines or watering the orchids Richard loved so much. He would watch from the terrace, cane in hand, a soft smile resting on his face. Every afternoon, they would share tea in the sunroom. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not. Silence had stopped being a punishment. It had become a quiet language they both understood. One evening, Olivia found Richard in the library, surrounded by old ledgers and sealed envelopes. "What are you working on?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "Trying to settle unfinished business," he said. "When I was younger, I built a company and lost sight of the people who helped me. Some of them never recovered from the choices I made." Olivia stepped closer. "Then maybe this is your chance to make peace." He studied her face. "You think peace is still possible after 71 years? She smiled gently. "Peace does not keep count of time, Richard." That night, Richard called his attorney and made a decision to start a scholarship fund for young students in financial distress. "The Hart Alden Foundation," he said firmly, writing the name across the draft document. Olivia froze when she saw it. "You used my name," she said softly. "I did," he replied, "because redemption should belong to both of us." She looked at him. Then, and for the first time, her eyes filled not with pity, but with admiration. "You are not the man I married, Richard." "Maybe not," he said, smiling faintly. "Maybe I finally became the man she and you believed I could be." Weeks passed. Richard's health improved, but something inside him seemed to quiet. One morning, Olivia found him at the piano, running his fingers gently over the keys. "Play something for me," he said. She sat beside him and began a soft melody. Halfway through, he joined in with a few uneven notes. Their hands brushed, and both froze, caught between music and memory. When the song ended, he whispered, "Olivia, I never thanked you for saving my life." "You did not owe me gratitude," she replied. "You just needed someone to remind you that you are still here." He nodded slowly. "And if I told you that you gave me more than companionship, what would you say?" She looked into his tired blue eyes. "I would say you gave me the same." The words hung between them, fragile but true. That evening, Olivia stepped out into the garden. The sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and rose, and she breathed deeply. For the first time, she felt that this house, this man, and even her mistakes had led her somewhere that finally made sense. Later that night, as she passed his study, she saw Richard asleep in his chair, the fireplace burning low. The document for the Hart Alden Foundation lay open on his desk. Next to it rested an envelope with her name written in his careful handwriting. She smiled softly and whispered, "Rest, Richard. Tomorrow will be a new beginning." Upstairs, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Sometimes redemption does not arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it simply walks in quietly, sits beside you, and stays." The mansion was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and the steady beat of her own heart. For the first time, silence felt safe. The deepest secrets are about to change everything. Subscribe now to catch the dramatic twist that is coming in the next chapter. The next morning, sunlight touched the windows of the Alden estate, soft and golden, but something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Olivia Hart called Richard's name. expecting his usual answer from the study. There was none. She found him still in his chair, the same place she had seen him the night before. The fire had burned out, leaving behind only faint embers. His head rested gently to the side, his hand still holding a pen. On the desk lay the document for the Alden Foundation, signed and sealed. Her breath caught. "Richard," she whispered, touching his shoulder. But he did not stir. His skin was cool, his face peaceful, almost smiling. In that moment, the world seemed to stop moving. The doctor said it had been a silent passing in his sleep, likely from heart failure. No pain, no struggle, just rest. But to Olivia, it felt like the sound of a door closing forever. The days that followed blurred into white flowers, quiet condolences, and the soft toll of the church bell. The funeral was small, dignified, attended by old colleagues and a few distant relatives. Olivia stood apart, her black dress fluttering in the breeze as she listened to the priest's words. When it was over, she lingered beside the grave. A single orchid rested on the polished stone. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You found peace. Now it is my turn to keep mine." Back at the mansion, the air felt emptier than before. Yet when she walked through the halls, she could still hear echoes of his voice, gentle reminders of the life they had quietly built together. On his desk, the envelope with her name waited. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dear Olivia, if you are reading this, then I have gone where pain cannot reach me. But know this, your kindness was not wasted on an old man. You gave me back the years I had already thrown away. You taught me that love is not measured by time but by courage. The Alden Foundation belongs to you now. Use it as you wish. Build something beautiful from our mistakes. With all my heart, Richard." Tears fell onto the page. Olivia pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "You were never a mistake." Outside, the wind moved through the garden, carrying the faint scent of orchids, and for a moment, she felt as though he was still there watching, smiling, proud. She looked up at the sky and said softly, "Rest easy, Richard. I will make sure your name means hope." The sun dipped behind the trees, casting a golden glow over the estate. Somewhere between grief and gratitude, Olivia felt the first quiet light of redemption. Months passed, and the Alden estate changed in quiet, meaningful ways. The silence that had once haunted the halls was now filled with voices, footsteps, and laughter. Olivia Hart had turned the mansion into the headquarters of the Alden Foundation, just as Richard wished. The ballroom that once hosted silent dinners now welcomed students, families, and volunteers. Every morning, she would walk through the foyer and glance at his portrait hanging above the staircase. "Good morning, Richard," she would whisper. "We are still keeping our promise." It became her ritual, a conversation with the man who had once feared loneliness and found peace through kindness. The scholarship fund grew faster than she imagined. Letters poured in from across the country, students writing about hope, second chances, and gratitude. She read every single one of them, keeping them in a wooden box marked "Lives Changed." Sometimes, she would sit by the piano, play the melody he loved, and think, "You are still here, somehow." One afternoon, a delivery arrived. It was a small box with no sender's name. Inside was an old fountain pen and a note. Found in a charity auction, belonged to R. Alden. Thought it should return home. Olivia smiled through tears. She placed the pen beside his framed letter on the piano, as if the circle had finally closed. Later that evening, she visited the garden. The orchids were in full bloom again, delicate and radiant under the fading sun. A light breeze brushed her hair as she whispered, "You see, Richard, the house is alive again, and so am I." She looked down at her notebook, the same one that had carried her doubts and pain months ago. Now it held something else: plans for a community center, programs for single parents, and a mentorship project for young entrepreneurs. Every page was filled with hope, written in her neat handwriting and sealed with quiet determination. That night, the foundation hosted its first charity gala. Guests mingled beneath the chandeliers, and the piano played softly in the background. When Olivia took the stage, she looked out at the crowd and said, "This house was once built from ambition. Now, it stands for compassion. This is what Richard Alden left behind, not fortune, but faith in people." The audience applauded, some with tears in their eyes. Olivia smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. After the event ended, She stepped outside. The moon hung low over the estate, silver and calm. The world felt still and yet alive. She whispered one last time into the night, "You taught me that love never truly ends, it just changes form." The wind carried her words through the garden, across the rows of orchids glowing under the moonlight. And in that soft glow, Olivia finally understood. Redemption was never about returning to the past. It was about learning how to live again, and to give that gift to others. A full year passed since Richard Alden's final goodbye, and Charleston greeted another spring. The estate that had once stood in silence now bloomed with life. Children's laughter echoed through the garden paths, and the piano in the main hall played every afternoon for visitors. Olivia Hart walked through it all with quiet pride, carrying both memory and purpose in every step. The Hart-Alden Foundation had grown beyond her dreams. It funded hundreds of scholarships, rebuilt community schools, and offered shelter programs for families in need. Every decision she made came from the lessons Richard had left behind: lead with heart, not ego. One morning, she stood in front of his portrait, sunlight catching the gold frame. "You were right," she whispered. "Redemption is not a destination, it is a daily choice." She smiled, remembering how he used to tilt his head when he listened, as if every word mattered. That afternoon, a young woman named Grace came to the foundation, holding an acceptance letter to a law school funded by the scholarship. "I just wanted to thank you," Grace said shyly. "My mother used to clean this house years ago. She said Mr. Alden was strict but fair. I think he would be proud." Olivia's throat tightened. "He would be," she said softly. "And so am I." When Grace left, Olivia walked into the garden. The orchids shimmered under the late sunlight, each petal glowing like a memory reborn. She knelt and placed a single white bloom at the base of the old oak tree where she and Richard had once walked together. "You see, Richard," she whispered, "your name means hope now. We did it." She looked toward the sky, the soft wind brushing her face. For the first time, she did not feel alone. The ache that had once haunted her had transformed into something gentle, a reminder that love, once given, never truly leaves. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the foundation held its anniversary dinner. Volunteers and students filled the hall with laughter, candles flickered on every table, and music played softly in the background. When Olivia took the microphone, she spoke with calm conviction. "This story began with regret," she said, "but regret is only the shadow of love not yet understood. Richard Alden taught me that wealth is nothing without compassion, and that second chances are not given, they are chosen. Tonight, we choose to keep giving, to keep believing, and to keep loving." The audience rose in applause, the sound filling the room like a heartbeat. Olivia looked up at the ceiling, the light glimmering above her eyes. She smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, "We kept our promise." Outside, the moon rose high over the estate, casting silver light across the orchids. Somewhere in the wind, she thought she heard his voice, soft, steady, proud. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic adventure. If you want more untold stories of billionaire love and redemption, please subscribe and choose your next true heart journey on your screen now.